Hey everyone, it's Jananie and welcome back to my channel, The Story Ain't Over. So today I'm hoping to bring you some fun and exciting audiobook recs. So as you may know, I read a lot of my books through audiobooks. I think it's a really easy way of getting through your TBR whenever you have a little snatches of time or when you're doing something else that doesn't really require your brain. So whether it's folding laundry or driving or just like taking a walk, I think listening to an audiobook while doing that allows you to read a bunch of books while also getting other things done. Ever since discovering audiobooks, they've made my life so much better, and I've been so much better at getting through my TBR because they just help motivate me to actually read when I just am too lazy or too tired to read the book. So I've done a book rec video for audiobooks before, so you can definitely go check that out. I'll leave it linked down below, but this video is just a bunch of new book recs of audiobooks that I've listened to recently that I really loved. So there are 3 YA young adult books on this list, and then there are 5 adult books on this list, so you can skip to whichever age category you want to, but let's just jump right in. Alright, so the first book that I have here is Yolk by Mary H.K. Choi, and as many of you may know, this is one of my favorite books of this year so far, of 2021, and the reason is partly because of the audiobook. I absolutely love the narrator because they managed to capture the main character's sort of sarcastic and self-deprecating humor and, you know, thought processes, which I absolutely love. But they also managed to capture like the raw emotion that this book portrays and all of the intense experiences the main character is going through. Basically, for those of you who don't know, this book is about 2 different sisters, Jane and June, but it follows the perspective of Jane. And June is a few years older than her and has always been sort of the like star child in their family. And Jane has always been sort of the problem child and struggled to sort of fit certain expectations. And although the 2 of them were really close when they were growing up in Texas, they have since sort of grown apart, even though they are both living in New York while June is working and Jane is in university. But all of that sort of changes when June gets cancer and Jane is forced to help her sister out in ways that she never had to before and sort of connect with her in ways that she never had to before. And they're sort of confronting their feelings about each other while also going through their own separate, like, very intense experiences. And whether it's to do with love or, you know, illness, they're both going through that and sort of going through it together. And they have, you know, starts and stops to their relationships, and it's a very sort of complicated and intense relationship as well, which I think was just so compelling to read about and listen to. So overall, it was just a fantastic book and a great one if you're looking for something about like siblings. And I think it was just so raw and powerful as well, which was just what made it so amazing to me, and I think the audiobook really portrayed that. Alright, the next young adult book that I have on this list is Goddess in the Machine by Laura Beth Johnson, and there's a very specific reason why I want to recommend the audiobook for this in particular. So this book is a sci-fi, and it follows our main character Andra, who is a 22nd century teen who is put into cryonic sleep along with her friends and family, and is told that she's going to wake up in 100 years to colonize a new planet called Hollymuth. But what happens instead is that Andra actually wakes up 1,000 years late in the year 3102, I believe, and she wakes up on a completely different place and finds out that no one else from, you know, her friends and family from back then are actually alive. And amid all of this, the people around her and, you know, the humans around her are all referring to her as some sort of goddess. They believe she's some sort of magic and that all the technology around them is actually some sort of magic. They have lost their sort of perception and knowledge of technology. And so one of our other main characters is Jade, who is the exiled bastard prince of this like sort of kingdom where Andra wakes up. And the reason I want to recommend the audiobook in specific is because all the people of Said, this place that Andra woke up in, actually speak a very different form of English. So a lot of the words and phrases have sort of been changed over 1,000 years since, you know, Andra was a teen and since, you know, our time. And so they say things a lot differently and they have like a different accent and everything. And so the audiobook narrator actually like narrates this with like the accent and, you know, says all the different words and everything. And I think it's just a fantastic way of bringing the story to life. Major props to the author for even like coming up with this sort of different language as well. But I think just listening to the audiobook really brings it to life, and, you know, you start to see how they pronounce things differently, but you also can quite easily understand, you know, this new version of English because it is built off of our own slang. This is a really great book if you're looking for a sci-fi or if you're looking for a fast-paced book with a lot of twists and turns. This one will definitely give that for you. All right, and the last young adult book that I have on this list to recommend is An Emotion of Great Delight by Tahereh Mafi. So as you guys may know, Tahereh Mafi is one of my favorite authors ever. I absolutely loved her other book, A Very Large Expanse of Sea, which is another YA contemporary, and this one was no different. I absolutely loved it, but I do think it's a very particular book for people who are looking for a particular type of emotion, which is sadness. This book is a very sad book in a very profound way, I feel like, and what I loved about the audiobook narrator is that they really embodied the main character Shadi's sort of sadness and her emotion throughout the book. I think it's very hard to portray emotion like that in, you know, a consistent and sustained way, but the audiobook narrator managed to do it, and I absolutely loved listening to it. There's just a way that she sort of breathes life into the words on the page, and, you know, Tara's writing was also just so beautiful, but the way it was just like brought to life was fantastic. Basically, this follows our main character, Shadi, who is this young Muslim teen. It's been several months since the US officially declared war on Iraq, and so there's that sort of political undertone in the background. But also, Shadi is sort of dealing with a lot of grief in her life. Her brother has died. She has some very unfortunate emotions towards her father, and she's also sort of going through a friend breakup. A friend who she was really close with no longer is quite the friend that she had before, and so she's going through that. And so she's sort of meandering through life and, you know, not really sure where it's going and holding all of the sadness within her. And there's also a little bit of a romance in this as well, but I think the overall idea of the book is just, you know, Shadi's emotional state and seeing it sort of change and fluctuate and even get better by the end. But it was just such a like short and powerful book. I think it's one that is just really great for anyone who has ever felt that sort of emotion growing up, I think, and, you know, it has ever been a sad teen, I think. It's very relatable in that sense. So yeah, the audiobook was fantastic, really captured that emotion and sort of angst and sorrow, and I absolutely loved it. All right, now we're on to the adult books, and I've got quite a mixed bag here, so let's just jump right in. So the first one is a thriller, and that is The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelids. I've read both of his books, The Maidens and The Silent Patient, and I do think I loved the audiobook for this one a lot more. This book does have two different perspectives, so there are two different narrators, but it's mostly focused on the male narrator. And what I loved about both the narrators in this audiobook was that they really captured the mental state of both characters really, really well. And I was just so compelled by their voices, and I just wanted to keep reading because I wanted to know what was going to happen next. I mean, part of that is like the story itself, but I do think the narrators really contributed to that. Basically, if you guys don't know, this book starts with one of our main characters, Alicia Berenson, who has mysteriously one day woken up and decided to shoot her husband multiple times in the face and kill him. And this becomes this sort of mystery and highly, you know, publicized murder because she immediately goes silent after the murder and won't say anything. And so she is, you know, committed into a psych ward and all of that. And a lot of people are interested in this case because Alicia seemed to really love her husband before she brutally murdered him. And this is where our other main character, Theo Farber, comes in. So he is a criminal psychotherapist, and he has been very interested in Alicia's case and knows that she is being held at this place called the Grove. And so he decides to sort of take a job there and, you know, wants to take on her case, even though most people have deemed it a lost cause. And he is determined to sort of get to the root of why she went silent and, you know, what happened with her and her husband and, you know, what caused her to kill him. It's an overall really, really interesting book and has some really incredible twists that I just did not see coming at all. So yeah, a really fantastic read and a great thriller if you're looking for one. And the audiobook narrators were just fantastic. All right, the next book that I have is The Stationery Shop by Marjan Kamali. So this is a historical romance that is set over multiple decades, and it has a section of the book that is sort of set in present day and then sections back in 1950s Iran. I think what I loved about the audiobook for this one is that since it is a quite romantic book with a lot of sort of angst and yearning, I feel like, I think the audiobook narrators really, really portrayed those emotions quite well. And I absolutely just found it a wonderful overall experience because I just felt like it was like a story being told to me. Basically, this book starts with our main character, Roya, in present day, I think like 2014 or something, and she's going to this like old age home to visit this man who she was previously in love with in 1950s. They were both teens back then, and, you know, Iran was going through political upheaval, and they were sending each other notes that they passed each other in letters that were left in this stationery shop owned by this man that they both knew, but they were sort of brutally ripped apart back then. And so she's getting to see him after many decades, and then it sort of flashes back to what happened back then. And so we are seeing how their lives sort of ended up and how it started, and you're trying to figure out what happened in between, and it's just such a heartbreaking story, I think, and such a sad love story, but I loved it. It just gives you all of the feels, and it was just so beautiful to read about, I think, as well, because Roya goes through a really emotional journey. Regardless of the love story, there are other parts to her story that deal with motherhood and grief that were just so compelling. And I think the audiobook narrators really, really captured that. There was like a lot of sort of emotionally heavy things that happen in this book that the audiobook narrator really captured well. Overall, a 10 out of 10 book if you're looking for a sad, love story to pick up and one that will sort of break your heart, and just one that's like perfect to sort of curl up with on a rainy day. Speaking of sad love stories, this one is also a little bit similar but less tragic by the end, and that is The Beautiful Ones by Silvia Moreno Garcia. So this audiobook I absolutely loved as well, and basically it's set in 1800s France in Loisy, and it follows these three different main characters. So one is Hector Auvray, who is this young man who is in love with this high society woman named Valerie when they were younger. And in this version of our world, there are some people who have telekinetic abilities, and it's like this very accepted part of society, but like they're deemed a little weird, but it's not like super unheard of. And so Hector Auvray is one of these people, and he has sort of made a career out of being a performer and using his telekinetic abilities. And so Valerie and him were in love, but when he has to go off to perform, her family ends up forcing her into a marriage with this wealthy man, and they sort of get separated. And the book actually starts many years later when Valerie's husband's cousin, who is Nina, ends up going to a party or ball and meets Hector Auvray. And she has been a fan of him for many years because she herself has some telekinetic abilities, but has never been able to control them. And when Hector meets Nina, he learns that she is related to Valerie and that he may get to see Valerie again, and has been sort of holding on to a bit of a grudge against Valerie most of his life, knowing that she had chosen to leave him. And so this becomes a weird little love triangle between these three characters, and it definitely goes in ways that I didn't expect it to, and which I really, really enjoyed. And I think what I loved about the audiobook narrator was that they all sort of captured the emotion of each of these characters, and also just like the personality of the characters really well. Nina is a very, naive and innocent girl who matures by the end of the book, and Hector Auvray is a very, jaded and cynical sort of man at the beginning who also changes by the end. And Valerie also is a very sort of high-strung and high society, snobbish woman who also changes a lot by the end. And I think I loved seeing the character growth for each of these characters, and the audiobook narrators portrayed it very, very well. Another thing I also loved was that this book has a lot of French words in it, and I could not for the life of me pronounce any of them, even though I took French for many years in school. So having the audiobook to sort of pronounce these words was very nice and just like added to the atmosphere of the book. All right, the next book is one that is a favorite among many readers, and that is The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. And I absolutely loved the audiobook for this one because I don't know what it was, but the audiobook narrator managed to capture the emotions of the characters really, really well, and sort of the grandness of the narrative really well. For those of you who don't know, The Song of Achilles sort of follows the exact plot of the Iliad, but it takes it from the perspective of Patroclus, who is the friend of Achilles in the epic, but it is taking it from like his childhood until much later towards the end of the Iliad, and you are seeing the way that he sort of grows up with Achilles and falls in love with him. And this book sort of extrapolates from the epic and, shows their love story and how Patroclus has sort of affected Achilles' life. And so being a sort of grand narrative that, takes place over many decades, the audiobook narrator really sort of captured that feeling of being told sort of a grand epic, and I felt like I was being told the Iliad. I feel like the voice of the narrator just really fit Patroclus's character, and that really added to my experience while reading this book. This book is definitely a tearjerker for anyone who is looking for one by the end, so I recommend for that reason, but also it's just a beautiful love story and also a really grand narrative. All right, and the final book on this list is a really recent read of mine, and that is All's Well by Mona Awad. And the reason I recommended this audiobook is because I feel like the narrator really captured the main character's voice and character and personality, but also her very specific experience with pain. Basically, this book follows our main character, Miranda, who is a college drama professor, and she is trying to get her class to put on a production of All's Well That Ends Well by Shakespeare, but they are instead bent on putting on a production of Macbeth because they think it's more interesting and, compelling. She really wants to do All's Well That Ends Well. And amidst all of this, this book is really focused on Miranda's character itself and how she has struggled with chronic pain for many years now after a terrible stage accident, and how that has sort of changed her life for the worse and how she's been sort of dealing with that. And this book has a bit of a supernatural element to it when these three strangers come into Miranda's life and offer to change it for the better with some magical help and with some very crazy consequences. This book is super, super weird, I will say that, but I think the main crux of it is the focus on Miranda's pain and, you know, how she's experiencing it throughout the book and how it has affected her life. And I think the narrator and their voice really captured Miranda's sort of cynical nature towards the beginning of the book and how she sort of turns manic by the end. One thing I found interesting about like the first half of the book at least is that it really sort of puts you in Miranda's shoes and makes you feel her pain. And I think the audiobook narrator really captured that with the, you know, wonderful writing by the author, but you are feeling that pain and it is slightly painful to read this book, I think, for the first bit of it. And I think that is sort of the point. So highly recommend if you're looking for a representation of chronic pain, but also just a really cool sort of character study, I would say, and also a book that is inspired by Shakespeare as well. A really great read for that reason. All right, but those are all the books that I wanted to recommend for this audiobook book recs video. I hope you enjoyed. Let me know down below if you guys have listened to any of these audiobooks or are planning to listen to any of them. I would love to hear what you thought of them if you have. And I would love to hear your audiobook recommendations as well. Are there any that you have listened to recently that you really loved? Because I would love to pick them up as well. Thank you guys so much for watching. Go check out my Instagram, Twitter, Goodreads, and TikTok in the description down below. And I will see you in my next video. So please remember that the story ain't over. Bye!